Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. My guest today is Trevor Blondeel. He is an advisor, speaker, and coach with a company called Operations Kickstart. So I'm really glad to have you here and talking about your specialty, which is emotional intelligence.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Excited to be here.
All right. So let's start with just a working definition. Doesn't have to be a dictionary definition. How do you describe emotional intelligence?
Quite simply, it's our ability to understand, perceive, and reason with our emotions and the emotions of others to get a productive outcome.
Nice. Go into a little detail, give some examples, and let's focus on the workplace first.
Okay. Yeah. So people will say, well, I'm like this at work, but when I'm at home, I'm like this. And I'm like, well, we're the same person, right? You're not switching your mind out or who you are. So we kind of have this misconception of that we can kind of turn our emotions on and off depending on where we are. And those emotions do carry with us. So in the workplace, we usually start there because that is where the impact of the profits may exist. And then there's some investment of training. And so often I know that the program's really working when they say, oh, my spouse or my neighbors kind of notice this, or I'm noticing that I'm trying to talk a little bit less and listen a little bit more, and I'm getting better interaction. And so that really spins off from whether you're doing it at work or whether you're doing it at home. And that first step is always that self-awareness, right? Am I aware? A couple tricks right off the hop is someone said to me years ago is that, Trevor, I can see that vein on your forehead starting to rise. And for me, I can feel tension in my back, or there'll be body signals that will tell me as saying, this is kind of triggering me. It's a good point to be mindful on how I'm going to respond in this situation.
Is it, I think we look at emotional intelligence, especially in the workplace, as something that's important for leadership to practice. But I suspect it's important for all of us to practice, isn't it? And whether it's leader and report or co-equals. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so so my focus is manufacturing. I work a lot with manufacturing. I worked in manufacturing for 25 years and working in construction. And there's that ability to connect. I work with a lot of engineers. A lot of engineers don't have people reporting to them. They have a very big impact on others and are a lot of times in project management roles. And that aspect really gets a lot of attention because how we show up impacts on how people feel. And how we make people feel determines the extent they're going to engage with us. So whether that's your neighbor or whether that is your colleague that you need this information from, a lot of times it's like, man, I don't know why that person is acting like that. They're just not, helping me out. And oftentimes when we can get into a deeper discussion and really set back and look at, well, what's going on here? Well, a lot of people aren't helping me lately. Okay, so let's talk about, like, how are you asking for help and how are you helping that other person, and really kind of like self-reflect on how does my behavior impact others' responses. And that's where the magic starts coming in, because people think, oh yeah, we need some help with this person over here. They really need some help. And when we break it down, we have so much influence ourselves just in our own energy and how we ask a question, small words, your body language, your timing. There's so many aspects. The great thing about this, Mark, is that there isn't one person that's just naturally more emotional intelligent than the other person. Because I'm a prime example of a person that really got it wrong many, many times. And I've just had to practice it a lot more. So the good news is that this is just something to practice, and there's many different areas you can just start with.
Are women better at emotional intelligence than men?
There are some surveys that lean towards maybe the women being a little bit better in some of that surveys. And I don't know why that is, but in general, there's not there's not a huge swing, and there's definitely not a difference in the ability to learn it. We are all equals in our ability to learn this skill. It's just really who wants to be more intentional on it. And this is 85% of the success that's being monitored in how people are successful in their role, whether as an individual contributor or a leader, is coming back to emotional intelligence, because we get to a point where one engineer is just as smart as another one. And so what's the difference? The difference is going to be, do you make people better around you? Are you the neighbor that people are like, oh yeah, I see Mark's home. Do they come to see you, or do they take the back door so they don't have to talk to you?
Mm-hmm. Here's my hunch, that women from the get-go are socialized to be more in touch with their feelings, more accepting of feelings, better able to discuss feelings, more attuned to others' feelings. And I think it's nurture, not nature. And men, of course, and I know I'm generalizing greatly, and I'm also this is sort of a Western perspective, I think, and probably more industrialized, but maybe not. And that men are not socialized to listen, to be empathetic, to be in touch with their own bodies, in touch with their own feelings. What do you think?
In the workforce, I could definitely see, and from my own experience, I used to have something written on the back of my office wall, which was, leave your emotions at the door. We have work to do. So I was very much, hey, this is results driven. When you come to work, you got to be able to separate, you issues that you have at home. And what I should have said is that Trevor is not equipped. He does not have the skills to have a deeper conversation of how you're doing. So we're going to leave all those opportunities elsewhere. And where I know that in my history, whether it's being a good parent, a good friend, or a good leader, I left opportunities because of a lack of vulnerability and the ability to show those emotions. And there's definitely issues with males, and in manufacturing, it is a male dominated industry. And that's a problem for the industry. For example, manufacturing pays more than in the average industry and is less engaged. And I think, and it's more male dominated. And one of the things we talk about is how do we get a greater diversity into manufacturing? Because females, males, different backgrounds, different ideas, diversity of thought creates better outcomes, which creates better profits. So definitely, I know that I had some women that I worked with that definitely helped me have deeper conversations around that. And that is how we develop. It's not about just thinking, okay, yeah, I'm going to be more emotional today. Well, it's not like that. It comes from dialogue and having conversations. And I think the more that we can mix, whether it's a female or whether it's just someone from a different background, you can develop your skills by understanding more of how other people feel about certain topics or how you impact others.
Let's talk about triggers. I'm paying attention to those in my life, personal life, business life, where there's something that can be said, an attitude that the other person exhibits, and it triggers me. And usually I feel it somewhere right in here in the gut. My stomach tightens. I probably pierce my lips together tighter. Purse, anyway, tighten my lips together. And definitely notice a reaction. So, and that happens with all of us. You know, we have beliefs, we have attitudes, we have biases. And when somebody exhibits something that is counter to that, I think I want to say naturally, but I'm not sure about that, whether it's natural. It seems instinctual many times. And it seems, my reaction seems uncontrollable sometimes. So it's difficult to pull back and not react based on that feeling and emotion. So take it from there, take it from the trigger and guide us through being attuned to it. What should we do with it? We all feel that.
First of all, you're in a great spot, Mark, because I don't know if we all feel that. I believe that you feel that because you just told me. However, have you ever said to someone, hey, Mark, you seem angry? And then you come back, well, I'm not angry. Why do you think I'm angry? That person is not in tune. So you are ahead of the game, Mark, right in this example, because you're able to identify that. So that's the first step. And I believe that there's a lot of people just aren't at the first step, because I've asked very high level professionals. I'll say, you know, what are you working on? What are you aware of? Like, what do I have to work on? Like, I'm good. I brought you in here to help with these other people. And to me, it's a quick sign. We all have something to work on. We all have triggers. And if you don't feel any of those, then that's your first step is to get in tune and really kind of step back and say, what is triggering me? So it's a great part. And it's one of the exercises that we do. And once you can start to identify that, then it's kind of like your own self-reflection of like, okay, so what is triggering that? Okay, so it could be someone, a neighbor with a religious or a political view, right? Which is very different than yours. So the antidote is coming at it with curiosity, because it's like, well, if that person's a smart person and I've got some level of respect for that person, then how do we lean in with more curiosity and saying, you know, that kind of makes me feel this way, because you can't argue how you feel. Tell me more on why you feel that way. Because that right there just kind of triggered me a little bit. And just by starting with some dialogue of saying and recognizing it, and Dr. Peter Sagal came out with this phrase, if you can name it, you can tame it. And just by naming, saying, hey, I'm feeling a little triggered off of what you just said. I'm not sure why, but could you tell me more on like what drove you to that thought, or where you're going with this? And then it's practice. So we start doing that a little bit more. You know, practice with someone that you feel safe with, so, you know, someone at home, or maybe it's accountability partner at work, and just start having that conversation of saying, I notice when this comes up, it triggers me. And then I say something, and we've all had that moment where, man, I said that and I kind of regret saying it.
Yeah, take it back and you can't stuff it back in.
That's it. You can't take it back. And once it's out there, it's out there. So this is a skill worth working on, because this is your legacy, right? Because how you show up impacts on how people feel, and how you make people feel determines the extent they're going to engage. So it's really helpful to understand how you feel and how you're making other people feel. And man, once you start honing in on that, your life can change. My relationship with my son has changed dramatically. He's 23 years old. And we went through some times where we were not getting along. I thought that kid's just not grateful, right? Like he doesn't, not respectful. And then I went through some experiments. So he's living in this house, and I'd show up and I'd be traveling. I haven't seen him a couple of weeks. And there's dishes all over, right? Like piled up. I'm like, dude, like, could you wash a few dishes? Like, what's going on here? And then there'd be no great dialogue through the night, right? And I'd be like, man, what's his problem? So I did an experiment, and the next time I came there, the dishes were still there. The only thing that changed was I just said, hey, how's it going? Like, what's going on? And just started having some dialogue. And I just ignored everything else. And guess what? We had a great night. So the problem wasn't my son, it was me. How I was showing up was impacting how he felt. I set the tone. And until we recognize how we set the tone, you're going to get this, the insanity of doing the same thing to get a different result. And it's amazing how much of an impact we can have on our family members, our neighbors, and our coworkers when we start recognizing that.
Mm-hmm. You pointed out something that I think is important, that there are some people, and I have known some, that are not able to be self-aware. They just come from a place here, and they just, I'll use a term of yours, they just show up, and they're not like, I have this, you remember Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio?
Absolutely.
I have Jiminy Cricket, and two of them on my shoulder, and I sort of watch how I am interacting with people, and how people react, and just the interaction. So I have the ability to sort of have my awareness hover above and behind me a little bit. And I think a lot of people, they just come from themselves, and they don't have that. Maybe afterwards they may, but I think we also tend to blame the other person for most things, because that's who we see. So being self-aware probably is helpful. And how do you do that? How do you learn that if you haven't, maybe some people just come by it naturally. How do you learn that, to be able to watch yourself with that sort of third person point of view?
Different ways we can do that. And the ability that people come naturally at it, I do believe that people have just worked on it, that people have been paid more attention. Whatever we pay attention to, usually will get better. And just by paying attention, just knowing that, hey, you got your Jiminy Cricket, and that's just a start right there. There's a number of different tools. One is journaling. Journaling's it sounds kind of hokey pokey, but when you put it down on paper and you got to kind of write down at the end of the day, what are the moments in the day that maybe you did get triggered, and maybe a response that you didn't care for. But I believe there's a great power in seeing yourself through the eyes of someone else, because sometimes we just don't see it. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and thinking, I just really want to upset someone today, or I really want to destroy a relationship. Maybe there's a small percentage, but I think most people want to be liked, right? It's a serotonin chemical in us as humans. We want to be liked. And the only way to understand it, if you don't see it, is you got to ask somebody. Maybe it's someone that you want a better relationship with, and it's starting with, hey, I'm just kind of thinking more. I notice sometimes you and I will disagree on this, and I find myself tapping out, and I don't want to do that. Can you give me some feedback on, is there something that I do that triggers you? Because I notice that sometimes we'll be talking about this and all of a sudden you'll kind of shut down. And it's amazing. You got to take the armor off, as Brene Brown would say. You got to take the armor off. You got to kind of come in. You cannot go in and start with the words, you need to, or why are you really need to kind of take that ownership right off the hop. And it's amazing when even when you've broken some bridges, you can still sometimes come back and say, hey, you know what? I recognize that maybe I haven't been the best person for you lately. And I want to know more about that. Can you tell me something that maybe I'm doing to impact on how you're responding? Because I just don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Takes courage.
And you talked earlier about sticking with it. You feel triggered and you start asking some questions of the other person, sort of in the same vein that you were just talking about. And that's really difficult. It's really difficult when you are feeling triggered to ask for more, hit me again with, but really you're not saying that. You're saying, can you help me look deeper at this?
Yeah.
Can you give me some feedback? My tendency when I get triggered is to pull back. If I can get away, to get totally away from the situation and give it thought. My part of my work background was as a mediator, and I still do some mediation. And when I pull back from a situation, I'm able to see multiple points of view almost simultaneously. So I'm able to see how might they have reacted that way, what might be going on with them, sort of ask myself some questions about the situation. And it helps me to not engage with that person, especially if it's a close family member, and we're in tight quarters or we're just together. What do you think about, and let me just mention a friend of mine who was a prosecutor was explaining to his 2-3-year-old what he did for a living. And he said, I put bad guys in timeout. So, and the kid automatically got it. So what about, as a first step, if you can, putting yourself in an adult timeout to reflect, I guess, if you can even do that, as opposed to what you might be inclined to do in that situation is to strike out, is to blame. Even if you're trying to get to the bottom of it, what is it that you're doing that's pissing me off? You may not approach it well. So
No.
What about an adult timeout before engaging?
That's a great point, Mark. And it's a great strategy. Our brains are naturally hardwired to fight or flight, right? We lived in tribes of 150 people, many years ago. And if there was a bear, we needed to have that fight or flight mode. And we are hardwired to respond that way. And we are also people that love to judge, right? We are naturally, sometimes I'll see someone that I barely know and I'm like, I'll catch myself. I'm like, why are you judging that person? Like, why did that thought even come into my head? Like, and then I feel like, why am I thinking that way? And just try to change your thoughts. If you can change your thoughts, you can change your words. If you can change your words, you can change your habits, and that all leads into a different legacy. So that whole being able to recognize that, hey, I am getting triggered right now, and I am not curious on what this person thinks. And I know that I'm going to go probably into a fight mode here, and this is not going to be good. And it's okay. And I don't care if it's a boardroom meeting. I don't care who the audience is, but give yourself permission to say, you know what? I think we need to stop this right now. I need to walk away from this conversation. And my personality, I love to fix, right? No, we're going to fix this right now. Probably one of the habits I've had to personally work on is that I don't need to fix everything. And a lot of times people aren't looking for you to fix it, and they're not looking for you to have a debate over it. And just walking away and giving yourself permission to say, listen, Mark, I just got to take a break from this right now. I don't want, and you can just say it. I don't want to say something that I'm going to regret. And I just need to kind of like time out myself right now. You can use that terminology, and that's okay, because you know what? We don't have to get it right all the time. But our emotions and our triggers are not an excuse for our behavior. And if there's anything I would want the listeners to take away today, is that you can't just come back and say, well, I was just really angry and that's why I said that. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to judge. It is not okay to act in a way that hurts others, right? I often will say, when you said that, what was the benefit for that person? Because if you can kind of like just say it in your head before you're going to say it, and saying, is this truly a benefit for this person, or is it just something I want to tell them? And if you can't see the benefit in it, you probably shouldn't say it. And then that's okay to just walk away, because that is something as a community, as a workforce, is that it's never okay. You always own and what your behavior is. You're not responsible for how you feel.
And maybe if we have the wherewithal to say it when we're pulling back from that conversation, maybe say, I know we need to work through this, and it'll happen. I'll come back to you when I can handle the situation and I've had some time to think and regroup, and I'll check with you to be sure you're ready to do it too. So it's not just when I'm over it, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But some mutuality there.
100%. Have some agreement, have some dialogue. Just have some conversation of like, what is really going on right now? Because if I'm feeling this, you're probably feeling it.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Do you think, gosh, it's not a fair question. Do you think this skill is more important in our personal relationships or in our work relationships? Can you say?
Yeah, I can say that it's from my own personal experience from working with clients. It's the same. You can't separate it. There is no work or home. And you were fooling ourselves if you really believe that, well, I'm like this at work, I'm like this at home. And it's kind of like, you know what? That's a story, right? That's a story that you're telling yourself, because there's certain habits and responses that you're going to have. And it's a skill that's going to come into both places. And rarely do I hear of this like amazing, open, empathetic person at home, and they have no ability to do it at work. It's rare, I don't really see that. So it's going to impact both, and it's both so important. And I really learned it mainly through my kids, working with my parents, and realizing that as I've honed in on this skill for myself at work, because that's how it started with me more, then it was like, oh, okay, so I can try this different technique with my daughter. And if I'm probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the space of self-awareness and awareness of others is that you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to respond. Empathy is not telling the person another story about yourself that was really traumatic and maybe even worse than what's going through with you, Mark. That is not emotional intelligence. That is not a way to check in with people. Sometimes we just have to say, thanks for sharing that with me. that must have been hard. I see you. And don't try to be like, oh yeah, I know exactly how you're feeling. No, you don't. I just want you to listen. I just want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be valued. I don't want a solution. And just getting out of that space of saying that, hey, I can just kind of be there, and being there at home or being there at work. If you're there, you're always going to be there wherever you are.
So I want to bring up a phenomenon that I think has been caricatured, and that's the millennials, 20-somethings in the workplace that are, and in schools, colleges, that are super sensitive. And I don't want to hear another person's I don't want to hear this speaker on my campus because I'm going to be triggered, and I need to give my trigger phrases, and I'm not well schooled in this. I'm not in it a lot, but it seems like we're going, and be your most authentic self, be your total self in the workplace. Bring everything into the workplace. That's acceptable. The phenomenon, and I'm sure there's a term for it. There are a lot of negative terms for it, but distinguish between that phenomenon and emotional intelligence and being, and what you're promoting.
That is a fine line on authenticity and coming with your whole self. And there is a major difference between just coming in and just laying everything out on the table, which is not okay, right? It's not okay to share everything with everyone. And what I try to help use is, how is this going to impact others? Right. So is it going to be now whether it's my sexual orientation, whether it's my beliefs, these are areas where we're accepted now in the workplace as authenticity. And it's okay. And we need to, be curious about each other. The problem exists when we start imposing our beliefs on others and saying, well, you should be doing this or acting in this way. And that's not real. You can come to work as yourself, but you can't expect everyone around you to be like you either, or to start acting these behaviors. So it's just, you can come to work as yourself, but don't impose those on others. And that's what creates diversity of thought, is that when there are different people that can bring their full selves, that aren't afraid to say their ideas, and their idea might not be the right one, but then they may spur an idea from somebody else. Because if we want to get more productive outcomes, we do need diversity of thought. To have diversity of thought, we need to have different people that think differently, that feel okay talking about how they feel. And as long as we're not imposing that on others, and we're truly just saying, hey, we want the best outcome. Hey, Trevor, you're a little different in this space. You think differently. What are you thinking around this decision? That's excellent. Okay, let's hear it from the next person. And now all of a sudden we're gonna have a much better outcome, and everybody feels that even though you didn't necessarily get the exact outcome you were looking for, that there is dialogue around it, and I respect your differences.
Is this phenomenon creating some headwinds for you and your message because it's being misinterpreted? Your message is being misinterpreted as bleed your feelings, blah, blah. Are you having some headwinds because of reactions to this phenomenon in the workplace?
Yeah, I would say, you could just start with the either whether we want to look at the turnover or the retention concerns, and people are leaving because they don't feel valued, right? That's usually the disconnect. It's usually not the money concern. And so, yeah, I'm definitely seeing some some great conversations on people wanting to get better at this, because we want to create the greatest pool of resources of people that we could hire. And if we can attract this largest pool, and then we can get the best fit for our organization, well, that takes that whole skill of continuing to have that ability to have dialogue and have conversations, and understanding the differences of, hey, you want people to be open, but you as maybe the leader are not very open yourself. So you think you want to be able to connect with employees, but you're not connecting with them. You're not being truthful about what are you struggling on, or what's your family situation. And we need to have those conversations, and that's going to create more of that connection and solve that problem of disconnect. So yeah, definitely there's more curiosity, because there is a need in our workforce to keep people. When we keep people, we stay there when we're seen, and we have that ability to increase that skill.
I'd like to take a brief section here before we wrap up to talk about the importance of this in our co-living concept. Co-living communities usually work around a decision-making process, either consensus or close to consensus. Very democratic, very involved, lots of people doing lots of things, wearing lots of hats, lots of communication. Talk about the importance of emotional intelligence and some of these principles in that setting. Maybe that maybe it's more important than people living in normal community.
I think of stories around working with someone that maybe people don't recognize as much. I was just at a major hotel chain in Kearney, Nebraska, and there's a guy that cleans the floors there and does some vacuuming and work. His name's Fletcher. And I just got to meet Fletcher, and I started talking to him. And then the owner of this huge complex happened to walk by, and he's like, "Ah, Fletcher." And he introduced me to the owner, and we ended up having a great dialogue. He says, "Yeah, Fletcher is from India. He's got a master's degree. He just comes here and does this work because he wants to send some money back home to his family." And then Fletcher was talking about he comes here because Paul treats him really well. And in a community living, it's just everyone needs to be seen. So it doesn't matter where you think that person came from. As simple as like when I go for a walk and you walk by somebody, it's amazing if you can just look them in the eyes and say, "Good morning. I see you." And then maybe the next time you catch that person's name. And the next time you learn something else. People like to be called by their name. And when you can connect with others and maybe take that moment to someone that isn't that important maybe in your eyes or other people's eyes, and just if you can treat everyone with the fact of, hey, I'm a human being, it's great to be seen, and people don't always remember my name, and you remembered my name and you asked about this, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. And even if you forget their name like I do, I could say, "Hey, I remember you. We talked about this. I'm bad with names. What's your name again?" And I'll tell them sometimes it takes me 3 times. And when you can really kind of understand where everyone else is coming from, you can live in a community of great diversity and great outcomes if we're all in this together.
Acknowledging that person and taking a moment for the checkout clerk at the grocery store, department store. Have you have you noticed that when you take that time to be real with them and not just, hey, how are you doing? I'm okay. How are you? But just to connect, and how appreciative they are, you know?
Yeah. And that's a great point on how you're doing. I was on the treadmill at a hotel recently, and this other gentleman came up beside me and says, "How are you doing?" And right away, I knew just in the way he didn't say, "How are you?" Because a lot of times we're looking for good, how you doing? And it's
Right.
like, well, it's not really a good use of our language, right? We're better than that. And really, if you're only expecting the good and it's just a pleasantry, just skip it. Just say good morning. Because if you're not really curious, but if you can really engage, and he did that, and I was like, wow. And I told him after, I said, I knew right away, you didn't mean how are you, and you were just looking for a good and walked away. He was actually curious, and I was pressed me. I was like, man, I need to get better at that, because
Mm-hmm.
if people can ask that question and say, whoa, this person's like really curious about me, it's not a pleasantry, and he's willing to stay here for a minute and kind of have that conversation. It's like, man, you can separate yourself in your own legacy of just being that person that was able to see others and make those special connections.
Mm-hmm. And your answer probably was, well, I'm about to pass out here on this treadmill. Thank you very much. I
Yeah.
can't catch my breath.
Oh, it was
So
okay. He got on. We had a good discussion.
there's a lot more I'd love to talk about, and maybe we can schedule another podcast another time, because I feel like we just skimmed the surface here, and I'm sure you have other topics that are top of mind for you that I'd like to have you come on and let's discuss. But let's wrap up for now. If people would like to get in touch with you to advise, to do a presentation, consult, how can they best reach you?
Yeah, my website is operationskickstart.com, and has all the contact information there. I've got a newsletter, I've got a podcast, and I'm on LinkedIn is where I'm mainly active, where I'll do different posts on there and get into more dialogue.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and introducing this concept. I know probably most people have heard the term, but probably haven't delved into it even as much as we have here. And I know there's a lot more to talk about with different settings, not just the workplace, and a lot more to discuss about how it affects our relationships, how to manage our emotions, how to be just aware of them. So I really appreciate you taking your time to share it with us, and we'll hopefully talk again real soon.
Absolutely. And I could talk about this all day, because every time I have a conversation about it, I learn more. And that's the trick. So go out there and have a conversation today.
Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.